this is the Fight Nerd, and joining me now is Pete McCormack, director of the upcoming documentary I Am Bruce Lee. Pete, how are you today?
I'm great. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, thank you for coming on today, Pete. Now, let's just start from the top. What inspired you to create this documentary about Bruce Lee?
Well, the company in Vancouver, Network Productions, we did Facing Ali together, the film about Muhammad Ali and the 10 opponents that he fought, and it was sort of in a way a continuation of the possibly the two greatest sports icons of the 20th century. At least the two that transcended their sport, I should say. There's obviously some incredible athletes over the last century, but those that transcended so many areas of it. Race, the sport, even time in a way. They're kind of timeless, So that was pretty exciting. So it was a continuation of that.
Yeah, I like how you call that continuation, because I was just going to ask you about Facing Ali. In fact, that's the name of the other documentary, Facing Ali. And in the I Am Bruce Lee documentary, there's a lot of discussion about Bruce and his feelings towards Ali. So what would you say were the similarities that these two men shared in their lives?
Well, I guess they're kind of in a strange way, Bruce especially, but they're kind of quintessentially this sort of American iconic spirit, and then they transcend the limitations within America at the time, And they are both also unbelievably poetic, fluid, and sexy, and pushing those kind of limits in ways we've never seen before. Bruce Lee brought kung fu basically into America. That fluidity of movement that Reggie Hudlin talks about in the film, about how even the black community could relate to him, like he moved like Muhammad Ali. And Muhammad Ali, of course, brought a certain poetry into boxing that was unorthodox and unheard of, and so they both were just sort of off the charts in terms of how they stood in their respective fields,
Yeah, that's one of the other nice things about the documentary, is that it does talk about people in various fields, from dance to martial arts to actual MMA fighting. Why do you think so many people from all these different walks of life can identify with Bruce Lee?
Well, I think, like Ali, actually, I think his charismatic power when you saw him as a kid is even more impressionable than we give credit for. In other words, we have a nostalgic feeling for it. We have a visceral feeling for it. When people saw Bruce Lee move, especially younger kids, and those that were a little bit older were getting into fighting and so on, or into boxing and perhaps into karate and later on into kung fu and seeing Bruce Lee, I think it just hit hard because he really was beyond the bar. You know what I mean? He just like Ali, they were too different and too charismatic to not have a visceral experience that changed the way your molecules were set up, kind of, So I think it's just one of those magical combinations between viewer and Bruce Lee, and so that reason alone, and then his passion and his intelligence for martial arts, of course, is serious. So I think those two things are very big amongst people that saw him. So it's sort of an inexplicable greatness that some people have, and which is why it's so wonderful.
And as we just mentioned, there's a lot of different people from various different things in this documentary. So if you don't mind, just run down some of the actors and other people that have appeared in this documentary.
Well, we had, of course, we had some actors like Mickey Rourke, who was a very serious boxer. We had Ed O'Neill, who's got a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and considered the toughest guy in Hollywood. And we had amongst the MMA guys, we had John Jones, and of course, who's almost a legend now already at this young age. We had the great Kung Lee, and we had Stephen Bonner, who had his classic fight back in the mid-90s. Mid-200s, sorry. And that sort of really pushed the UFC into the limelight. And we had Gina Carano, who's a wonderful fighter and also a beautiful woman, and so that variation was great. And then I think for me, and also we had some great academics too and great thinkers too. We like Paul Bowman from Cardiff University, who really took Bruce Lee in a different way, and Reggie Hudlin, the producer, who saw him in a certain way that expands beyond just the young guy who did good. They saw him as how did he affect the third world? How did he affect people of color? How did he affect all these different people? Seeing Bruce Lee in that moment, that incredibly difficult moment in American history, and also amazing moment when things were opening up, but also there was Vietnam, there were civil rights struggles, there were troubles with race, and I think those guys were great. But for me, it was so wonderful to talk to people like Dan Inosanto and Richard Bustillo, who were actually with Bruce back in the day, and that was, and Jean LaBelle, of course, and then also with Linda, his wife, and Shannon. I really got a sense of him at the time, and how loved he was, and how how much the impression that he made on them was so profound, so I just got this big, wide group of folks. It was really lucky. I was really fortunate, and I really wanted to put together an emotional piece on Bruce, who he was, from the spectrum of his strengths and perhaps his weaknesses in certain areas, and his limitations and his limitlessness as well. And so I just let them talk, basically. And I really love interviewing, and they gave me so much. I've always been really fortunate, like with Facing Ali, how much the interviewees opened up to me. So I was really, really enjoyed that process a lot. And I loved uncovering Bruce Lee. It was a real thrill and a passion to do that.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, is uncovering Bruce, since you really did dig deep with this documentary. And speaking about Linda and Shannon, Bruce's wife and daughter, these are two women that have had to basically talk about Bruce for all their life, and it's always amazed me how strong they are to be able to do that for so many years. I mean, talk about working with Linda and Shannon for this documentary. What was it like to work with those two together?
Well, what was great for me about that was, you take on Bruce Lee and you're thinking, well, who is this man? You research. I read everything. I just researched everything. I saw everything I could see. And when you sit down with him, you sort of get an essence of that he was a good guy. Along with everything else, he was a good guy, because they're very sweet, kind, open, caring, loving people. And you go like, wow, and I want to add this too. When I did research, of course, I looked up every interview Brandon ever did too, and that guy, interview after interview, was so kind to people, And people would say things to them like this, like, what was it like growing up in Japan? And they're like, that would like really get me going if it was me. You know what? I'm not Japanese. You know what I mean? Or whatever. And they didn't even flinch. They just said, no, actually, we were in Hong Kong. You know what I mean? And those kind of things. And they were really sweet about all those things. And I was really impressed with that. And Linda is really gracious, and she was really honest and open, and Shannon was too, and they were really giving, and they're really essential in this film. And yet we're able to go wide with them and not make it look like just like a, it wasn't just we were able to go deep and go into all sides of Bruce, the journey through fame, and the intensity of his struggle in Hollywood, and the difficulty growing up even in Hong Kong, where they were occupied first by the Japanese and next by the British and so on, and they gave a lot to me. So I'm really grateful for that, and I really liked them a lot. So that was interesting to really like people when you interview them, and then to do a story about their husband and father, But I was really lucky to do it, and I liked them so much.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the composition of the documentary, especially the opening, because with the opening of this film, you actually start with the end at Bruce Lee's funeral, and you use that to kick off the story of his life. So why did you choose to start the documentary with the funeral, basically the end of Bruce Lee's life?
Well, I think it adds a certain gravitas to it, a certain weight to it, and I think also it's just, it's good not to be too linear completely when you're doing a film, and also to set up certain, so this is basically from a script writing point of view or from a directing point of view, just to set up a certain tension that we feel. So we're in their emotion, we feel it in a certain way, and it was just a bit of that. It was a taste of what was to come, this unfortunate idea. So when you're watching this guy struggle so hard, it gives a different emotion, because there's a certain tragedy to that. Of course, ultimately it's an amazing life, period. But there's a huge tragedy to dying at 32 with a guy so talented, and so limitless in a way. And it's also humbling. We see that this world is this time is temporary. This is a transitory experience, and you just got to go out there, as we say towards the end of the movie. We don't say it, that the people say it. You just got to. Linda says it, is what and Bruce says it. You got to believe in yourself. You got to go and live a life, because it's gonna. And Bruce is an example of living a life, because it can go in an instant. And I think it just set up a certain kind of weight that it's not your normal kind of documentary. We're not just going to go into Bruce Lee, inventing some idea or whatever. We're really going to dig into his psyche, and that was basically the reason behind that.
And as you mentioned, you did a ton of research for this documentary, and it absolutely shows top to bottom. So, what was the most surprising fact that you learned about Bruce while making this documentary?
Well, I think, this might be obvious to martial artists, but to the rest of the world, it's that martial arts was really his passion, even more than filming. He's known as the kung fu guy on films. The most, he's synonymous with that. You say Einstein, you mean, hey Einstein, it means hey your brain. You hey Bruce Lee, it means you're into kung fu. You know what I mean? I think so. For me, it was really understanding the nuance of his understanding of martial arts, how he transformed the ideas of lineages in martial arts, and how he said what the limitations of that were, and his ideas of, style without style kind of thing, and the style with no style, and those kind of things. But and then asking the question, what does that really mean? What does it really mean to honestly? We know those things like be like water and honestly express yourself. But I would say, like, what does it really mean to honestly express yourself in the middle of a no holds barred, no rules moment of combat? What does that actually mean? And can that be Zen Buddhism or a type of yoga, or can that be a kind of type of Taoism of fluidity? What does that mean? And that was really interesting to me because it interests me anyway. Those kind of tensions in life. So I really want to explore that. And his statement on that is really deep and unusual. To bring it into almost like a spiritual practice of fighting without being soft on that, either him or myself when I'm doing the work, because I want to show, it is. There's a certain kind of let's say, spirituality or yoga or intensity to that moment, of course, but it's not a joke. You're in combat, it's dangerous, as we talk about in the film a little bit as well, and how he balanced that, because everybody's got their own journey in life, so you just don't have to you don't sit with your legs crossed just to meditate. You can also be a martial artist and be on a spiritual journey, or at least a journey of self-discovery, for a better term, and he talks about that with such passion. So I really wanted to, as you saw it pushed in the film, what does it mean to honestly express yourself in the middle of combat? That's different than honestly expressing yourself while you're, oh no, it's not different actually, but it's a different means of manifesting it, but it's kind of dangerous for a lot of us that don't fight the same way, So I really loved exploring his martial art intensity. That was really exciting for me, and to see how much he had thought about that, and how risks he took, and how he pushed the boundaries of that. And I think that's a lot to do with his greatness, In fact, in films, arguably, you people say, look, he transformed, filmmaking forever. Well, he did in a certain extent, but you don't see anybody doing what Bruce Lee did on films. You see kung fu, but not what he did, because they can't do what he did, right? So they have to have these always rapid cuts for all the actors and stuff, because they don't do kung fu, because they have insurance on their getting hurt and so on and so forth. So that's it. But martial arts, you really see it expressed in MMA and in other ways of what he was doing, And I think that's really an amazing achievement on his part, and I loved exploring that.
Yeah, Bruce's fight scenes are definitely among the best out there, and especially as I'm sure many of my viewers have seen the unseen footage from the Game of Death. That fight scene would have been great if they'd have finished it. In your opinion, if Bruce had been able to finish the Game of Death the way he wanted to make it, do you think that would have revolutionized the film industry, and how do you think it would have changed if he had been able to finish it?
It's really hard to say, because it seems to me that the Game of Death was still an incomplete idea, However, as they pointed out, the idea of the levels in the pagoda is a very interesting idea that he was doing. I think not so much the Game of Death, Matt, but I think that he would have continued not only to do martial art films and other kinds of films, but martial art films. He was always exploring how to overcome and expand on certain obstacles, and that was his nature. That was always in his teaching, always in his stories. How to when the next person comes, how do you confront it? How do you be like water? How do you be flexible around this moment? How do you adapt? How do you trust? And so I think had he lived, he would have done many things in that direction. He would have written more in that direction. And what does that mean for in just non-combative life? Although when is life not combative? You know what I mean? So I think with Game of Death, it's really hard to say. But the bottom line is that fantastic fight with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, which says it all too. That's an interesting fight with Jabbar too, because they get to the end, and it's almost like with equal skill, he can't defeat Jabbar, And then it turns out that Jabbar's got an issue with photosensitivity, with light, and so that's his way through. But he actually was struggling in that fight. Don't forget, it wasn't Bruce Lee winning that. He found yet another way, And so, but it's a great question, because it's really fun to think, how would that movie had gone on yet. But I don't think the film was fully developed. Actually, he was just starting to explore. Like Linda said, he saw Jabbar Kareem when Kareem came to Hong Kong. Said we should do a fight scene. It'd be fantastic, But yeah, we definitely didn't get enough Bruce Lee.
No, absolutely not. Now, speaking of, why is Bruce Lee still relevant nearly 40 years after his death?
Well, I think because like Ali, he sort of transcended so many boundaries. Like he was the one, like the line in the film, he put balls on Chinese men. There's some. It sounds like people are maybe not comfortable with the term sometimes, but what he's saying is, listen, before Bruce Lee, they were doing not completely. There were some Asian actors that were doing really well in Hollywood, or fairly well in Hollywood. Especially in the 50s, there was a guy. I think he was a Japanese. I can't remember his name. But I think most of the characters were like Hip Sung. In what's her, I can't remember in Bonanza. And he's making the breakfast for the Cartwright boys. That's what they're saying. That's what Diana Santo was saying. He transcended that and said, no, we are sexy, we are right there, we are virile, we are powerful people, and that struggle continues now. I mean, like I said in the film, like name the one Asian American, your favorite romantic Asian American lead male. It's a tough question. You know what I'm saying? So, but he's relevant for many reasons in that way, and of course, the blossoming of mixed martial arts and UFC is a huge reflection on his ideas, as Dana White points out. So right away, he's very relevant. And that makes him controversial, too, because the question was sort of in the film, is he the father of mixed martial arts? And would he be proud of that? And how proud of that would he be? And what would he think about this spectacle the way it is in all its greatness and all its other things that people might question in society, about it? I think that's great, too. And I think, of course, martial arts is all over the map now. A lot of kids take martial arts instruction now, like millions, and I think so that way. And of course, in all films, we get kung fu fighting and martial arts kind of fighting, as opposed to the old John Wayne one slug, guy goes down, and so that's a reflection of Bruce Lee to a large extent as well. All the careers of the action heroes you can see bits of Bruce Lee in there, and I think his nature of his determination, he didn't make things about race for him, even though they were often about race. He couldn't get work in Hollywood. He didn't make it about that, and you can feel that kind of spirit in him. And I think that's probably very useful for people and as an example to people. And I think that he just has that, and he has that iconic look that stays. So part of that's mystery, but I think there are many areas that he's opened up and inspired. And at the end of the day, he's, like he would say, he's just a human being, so it also gives us that kind of inspiration. Like, yeah, he's just a human being, obviously with immense talent, but he's unstoppably driven, So, when he says style is no style, he doesn't say you can't have a style. You have to have a really good style to let go of a style. So it's not just do whatever you want, because that's not going to work in fighting, as we all know. You have to have great fundamentals, and then you can start to let go of them. Like a great painter, Picasso would be an example. He gets into a certain kind of the paintings when they got unusual. He had great skill and then went to there. John Jones has great skill and then starts to create. He doesn't start to create without the great skill and the great practice that he's already done. And I think that's great for anybody to understand that. So I'd say those are some of the ways that he remains a huge impression on the world.
Okay, so Pete, what would you say is the main reason that people should check out the I Am Bruce Lee documentary?
Well, I think with the documentary, what we tried to do is really get a wide take on Bruce Lee. That is to say, himself as a human being, a full spectrum of who he was, not just as the chop socky kind of kung fu guy doing movies, that caricature. But although he's unbelievable in that area, just to get the whole wide essence of who he was, to get him as a human being, as a man who struggled, as a person who overcame limitations, who fought his way, and that influenced so many people. And then I think after that, once you see that this, and also to have the experience of entertainment, that it's emotional when you have an experience with the film as well. You laugh, these guys these people we interviewed are really interesting. And finally, I think the I Am Bruce Lee title is basically saying you can watch this film and get what you need to get from Bruce Lee, because everybody takes Bruce Lee on as their own. So people take him on. If people are into philosophy, Bruce Lee can be their philosopher. If people are into martial arts, they take him on as a martial artist. If people are trying to overcome bullies at school, they take him on as the guy that overcomes bullies. And I think that's the greatness of Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee gives us multiple facets of the journey of life to latch on to as inspiration. And I think that anybody can find something magical about Bruce Lee if they watch him. So I think that's why I love doing the film and why I think people will enjoy watching it.
All right, well, to all my listeners out there, you guys can check out I Am Bruce Lee in limited theatrical release in February, early February. But if you miss it there, you will have a second chance. Check it out on Spike TV on March. And you guys definitely should, because it's one of the best Bruce Lee documentaries that's out there. Pete, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it today.